Now let's look at the anatomy of a computer. Well, computer is a generic term. Uh, Laptop or desktop, the components are almost similar. The only difference would be the size. So we have seen the components of computer. Now we will see how they actually work inside a computer. So this is at least a decade old Sony wire. I just opened the whole motherboard area. Now this is what the power socket is. So regardless of laptop or desktop, you will have a power supply. So through the power supply, it goes to the motherboard. So the moment you switch on the laptop or your computer, so what happens is you get power to the motherboard, and immediately the first thing that it runs is there is a BIOS in the motherboard. I'm not sure where it is actually, because depending on the model and the year, there could be a ROM or the flash drive. Now in the flash drive is where you have the BIOS, as we explained in a video. BIOS is a operating system, a minified operating system for the motherboard. So the first thing that boots is BIOS. So BIOS knows what is being connected to the system. The RAM, all that it detects, the RAM, the hard disk, all that. So you could configure in your BIOS, let's say you have two hard disks, or say you have two partitions in your hard disk. You can also say in your BIOS which hard disk to boot. Now, one hard disk might have a Linux and the other hard disk might have a Windows. So you could also choose in the BIOS which hard disk to boot. So once you say that this is the hard disk that you want boot, when the setting is being saved in the BIOS, the next time when you start your laptop, the motherboard is being powered. So the BIOS detects that this is the hard disk that is being configured, and the OS inside the hard disk. The OS always resides inside the hard disk. Now, from the OS, from the hard disk, the OS is being booted now. So then you can access every other hardware. Like, right? OS is pretty much to use all these resources. Now I'm just going to show the parts in this laptop. So you saw this is how you give the power supply, and this is the RAM. Now when you run something, say a OS or a software, this RAM, right? These RAMs are pretty much 2 GB, 4 GB, 8 GB, 16 GB, 32 GB, 64 GB, there's even up to 128 GB. Now these RAM is where, so you know there's a storage now. So these RAMs are where the OS or the software actually runs. So it is basically, just consider this as a vessel where you cook. So this is the place where the OS or the software runs. So the motherboard, BIOS, and the OS boots. When the OS boots, it takes place in the RAM, and whatever software keeps getting executed, all that runs in the RAM. Now this is a battery. Now this battery is similar to the battery that you use in your watch. Now why do you need this battery? Well, just think about it. You switch off your computer, but the next time you start your computer, the time has been set right. How is it set right? I mean, you might have set the time sometime back, and when you switch off the computer, obviously the power is gone. How will it hold the time? So the BIOS, right? The BIOS is what needs the battery the most. So this battery is for the BIOS. So that information is actually stored in BIOS, the date and time, and this battery is always in power. So if this battery life is gone, then just consider your date and time that you saved is gone. So every time you reboot your machine, if this battery doesn't has its power, every time you reboot your machine, you have to provide the date and the time. Now this is the CD drive. Okay, so the motherboard, as you look at it, it has so many capacitors. It has buses, pretty much these connections within the motherboard that keeps sending the power and the data. Now, the most important thing in a motherboard is the chipset and the processor. So here is the chipset. Chipset is basically, it's like the traffic cop. Oops. So do you see it? Yeah. Okay. So the chipset is basically like the traffic cop. Now the data that keeps moving from the RAM to the processor to the hard drive, all, I mean, and other components too, all that has been monitored by this chipset. And there is a processor over here. See, this is a processor over here. This is your typical Intel processor, and this is the fan. The fan, when it keeps rotating, the cool air is being sent to the processor. And this, in your phones, you might call it cooling chamber and whatnot. So you might have modern names for that. So so this is a cooling chamber, and this is copper material to make sure it is cool. And this is the processor. The processor is the one that actually, just if RAM is the cooking vessel, processor is pretty much the hands that you use to cook. So processor is the one that actually does the arithmetic calculations, the process of the software, your programs, and your OS, all that is done there. And a laptop will have typical components like this one. I hope you see this. This one, this is basically the wireless LAN adapter, and these ports that you see is for the hard disk. I have the hard disk removed, and you have the USB drives. And if you see these USB drives, right, these are pretty much connected to the motherboard. So everything is being connected to the motherboard. And you have your audio jack and more USBs, and you have your HDMI cable, you have your serial ports, and you have your network Ethernet. So this is how you connect your router. You can connect it if it is wired, or if it is wireless. The wireless LAN adapter has been here. So this is the one that keeps sending Wi-Fi signal and receiving Wi-Fi signal. So again, when you boot your machine through a power supply, it goes to your motherboard, and then it goes to your BIOS. BIOS already has the configuration which hard disk to start, and so that runs the specific. I mean, you can have multiple hard disk in your computer. It's always possible. You could also remove the CD drive and even attach. The CD drive is also attached to a slot, right? See? So this slot, you also get like adapters in the market. So you could use an adapter and even connect another hard disk to it. So the obviously after the BIOS, the hard disk, chosen hard disk OS is run. And when it runs, it takes a space in RAM, and then this is where it runs. And obviously the fan runs. The processor obviously is the one that whatever software runs, the OS runs, all that is being handled by this processor. So again, the chipset is basically, it's like a traffic cop to see, I mean, to monitor and make sure all the communication happens well with within the components, not just processor, hard disk, and RAM, but all other components. This chipset is the one that takes care. But essentially, motherboard is also plays a very crucial part. It is where everything is being attached. So think of this as a communication layer on top of which everything is being attached so that the communication happens easily.